concept has always been the idea of arguing in peace, and people with differing positions having the ability to have a rational discussion about difficult topics. Like what are the topics that are just the most like, do not touch, do not go near these, because there's just no way to have a civil discussion.
Yeah, like I've seen people promote like argue in peace. Let's argue peacefully. What do you think about crossing the street?
Right.
You
right.
cross on red?
There's not like a strong pro-domestic violence group out there, or like a mothers for drunk driving. Like,
exactly.
So these are politically
that's pretty
safe.
Easy. Yeah.
Yeah, and I see. It's interesting to me because I've always been intrigued by dangerous ideas, and I think, as someone who's professionally argued both sides of issues, and my personal feeling about an issue isn't always what I'm advocating for. I'm very comfortable looking at argument as the way that I think you and I do, which is looking at it as an intellectual exercise, and also a way to sort of suss out the blind spots in your own position on something, to look at, alternate ways of thinking.
Are you able to, you could compare the arguments when you argue for a client, something that you emotionally believe in and something that you don't emotionally believe in, you're able to argue the same?
I think so, because it's just for 21 years I've been doing that. But I also think that, it's a little bit like a method actor. Like a good lawyer is a little like a method actor. Like you pretend you're that person, like what's his name, became Abe Lincoln, like you become the Joker, and then you sort of, what would the Joker do? Not what would Heath Ledger do, what would the Joker do? So I think to some degree I try to put myself into someone's story and mentally, and sort of think about, okay, what's the merit of their position, and if the things they are saying are true, knowing that they probably aren't all true, like facts all come with points of view. But if this person's story was what they're saying it is, what would be my feeling? What would be like, how would I feel about this? What would I be offended by? What would I be intrigued by? And then I think about that from the audience perspective.
So no, I'll ask it to you differently. Are you able to argue something? Let's say, understand your client the same way.
Yeah.
On a topic that you have an opinion about and a topic you don't have an opinion about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first of all, I don't know that I have incredible. I think one of the things I like about you, and I think it's a basis of our friendship, is that you don't seem so married to the outcome of a lot of things. Like where do we get to logically in this? You're very open to, well, what's your premise and what's the other side's premise.
Yeah, I don't really care where.
Yeah, well, I think, as a man of faith, you probably have more red lines than I do in terms of things you believe very firmly. I don't have a lot of ideas that I'm deeply married to and go, no, I would die to defend this ideal.
Yeah, but I don't. You see, I'm not defending generally ideas.
Right.
What I try to defend is the structure of how you discuss ideas.
Right.
It's very different. I mean, the ideas, let's say they're predetermined. Let's say it's my faith. I don't believe in something different than those ideas. But the question is, how do I prove those ideas to be true? That's what I'm arguing. And I'm not scared to try to argue, because if I'm wrong, I still believe in the idea.
But see, the thing about faith, for me, that's interesting is it reaches it's a starting point. It's also a stopping point. Because at some fundamental level, if we're having a debate, if we want to call it an argument, about the existence or non-existence of an omnipotent creator deity, right? Like, there's going to be a moment where we get to where we go, well, you either believe or you don't. Like, proof denies faith to some degree. There's either, like, you believe
but then I
this
wouldn't
thing,
argue
you don't.
those topics.
Right, well, that's what I'm saying.
Like, I'm not going to gain something I don't know enough about to argue.
Right.
Like, I don't.
Right.
If I would know enough about it, I would go there. I'll say it like this. We all have ideas in life, thousands of ideas, right? Some of ideas are about God, and some are just about...
Right.
I never believe any person fully understands their ideas.
Well, I think, one of the things that I find very interesting in our discussions is that you're very conscious of your ideas.
I try to be, but I try to understand my ideas.
Because I think, as I've said to you before, like whoever discovered water, it wasn't a fish. When you're in a thing, you don't see it very often. And so we have a lot of preconceived notions, a lot of presuppositions that, we don't even realize we have, like first principles that we're working from that we don't even, acknowledge as real or that we can't control for because we're not aware of it. But where I think this gets really interesting is, so to someone like you and I, who tries to approach argument from a logical perspective, who tries to honor the process of using argument to suss out strong points and weak points in our ideas and the other side, the opposition's, perspective. I think we've reached a moment in this culture where there are certain topics we can't argue in peace on, because just raising the questions has become something of a hate crime, or become something of just such a thorny idea that you're vilified for even acknowledging the possibility that there might be something worth talking about, right? That anyone has. I mean, there are so many ideas that are like racism is an incredible. Like anyone would say, or I shouldn't say anyone. Most people would say I'm against racism, right? It doesn't mean that person doesn't have some racist ideas or have some racist presuppositions or some stereotypes that they believe, whether they acknowledge that or not. And so, how do you have a discussion about some of these things? Right now, I think, in the kind of cultural zeitgeist, gender and biological sex, that's one of those topics that even having the discussion has become a form of, oh no, if you're even having a discussion about the truth or falsity of a person's gender identity or self-identification as to their gender or sex, if you even question that, you're guilty of a hate crime. And that, to me, is as a lawyer who argues for a living, who finds that the best pursuit of justice is argument, is two sides with apt counsel, arguing on the merits in a fair way with rules, without ad hominem attacks.
So you just basically gave the public now your weakness. Like you're telling me that if I want to go against the famous lawyer, James Sexton, yeah. I just basically say that I'm not comfortable with your masculinity and your understanding of my gender. Right. You won't have any argument. What happens if I want to take away the kids from your client?
Right.
Could I just say I don't, especially you represent people from the Orthodox community, right?
Of course, sure.
A lot of people I know are represented by you, right?
Sure.
So I have an easy argument to take away every single person from the Orthodox community, right? Say, hey, I'm not comfortable that your client has an understanding of what pronouns mean.
Right. Or your client's conception of gender as being tied to biology in any fashion is an act of violence. I mean, that's the sort of level of extremity. And I have to say, because I feel like I have to throw the qualifiers in there, I have been someone who's a fierce advocate for LGBT issues for many, many years. I've been a consulting attorney for Lambda Legal, which is the largest LGBTQ plus organization in the world for legal advocacy. I've been 20 years. I've spoken at Lavender Law. I am someone who has a very, I think, progressive perspective on those issues. And I'm afraid to have honest discussions about pronouns, honest discussions about the tie between biology and sex, or gender and a person, what their assigned gender at birth is, or their assigned sex at birth. And I see people, good, credible people that I know have great kindness in their hearts and don't want to be, I don't say quasi-fascist in their ideas, but really so unbelievably unforgiving in their ideas. These are progressive, kind people, have a tyrannical approach to that discussion. And that if you even question this concept, and what my first thought is, and I'm interested to hear what yours are, is anytime something's that hot of a topic, it's that much of an emotional response in someone, I am fascinated. Because what is it about that topic that is so taboo that we can't even talk about it? We can't even acknowledge that there might be multiple ways of looking at it that each have some validity in some fashion.
That's the question.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say more. That's the messianic question.
Yeah.
You have to understand when
this guy with the phone, I mean, unbelievable. It's rookie mistake. No, it's okay. We're going to get edited anyway.
Like this. When we discussed this yesterday and you said, hey, let's discuss this on the show.
Well, but let me give a little context. The reason I said let's discuss this on the show is I was trying to think about, look, you want to beta test arguing in peace? Throw in the most extreme thing.
I got it. So like
nobody seems capable of arguing in peace.
I would say it more. There are two topics that when we started talking about this, there are two topics that we could argue in peace, right? We could pick the most benign topics to argue about, like, hey, do you believe in Passover? And we're like, hey, you're not Jewish, I'm Jewish. We're arguing you believe peacefully, right? That's totally maturity,
that's easy.
Right?
That's kiddie pool.
That's kiddie pool. That's not even a kiddie pool. That's like what are you doing? We're promoting arguing peace, and people are looking in the crowd like, do you really know what an argument is? On a real argument, could you argue peacefully? And our plan was, let's get the show off. Let's have like 30, 40 shows of benign almost stupid topics
Right.
like child custody in this fashion,
Right,
and
right, right.
we're not gonna have a show. No one's interested in watching that.
Right,
So yeah, we have to show the argument piece in like the most greatest parables.
Right.
But this is something very, very cool. I've recently spoke about this with a good friend of mine. I have a very good friend who I didn't speak to about for like 3-4 years. He had an addiction issue, I believe, and it caused him to distance himself from a lot of people.
Sure.
And I flew to Israel. I told you I was like 3 weeks ago in Israel, 2 weeks ago.
I remember you were away.
Great time. Yeah, I went to Israel with my whole family, and I met up with him. Right, he's not religious anymore, and he has a fascinating life story. And he asked me, he's like, well, why do you want to talk to me still? Well, I'm not religious anymore. I'm not part of the community. Yeah, he went to the same university as I did, and we studied for 7-8 years together. But like, what now? What do we still have now? And he really doesn't know what I've been doing with my life for the last 4.5 years since I moved back to America. Yeah. So it's like, I think he still thinks I'm studying in a regular school every single day. And I'm like, I don't know. I look at this as a blessing. He looks at me like, well, what do you mean? And he's an artist now, and he's like selling philosophy books, and he's like, I'm like, I used to want to bounce off ideas to be able to see how valid my arguments are. You want to bounce it off the person who you believe is the smartest person, who for sure is going to argue, right? And I always felt with you, you held back certain arguments because like Orthodox people don't discuss that.
Right.
So we never took our arguments. I never took my knowledge there with you. Like now we can make our friendship even bigger.
Yeah.
You're like looking at me, he's like, "Are you for real right now?" Like,
no,
but
I have to tell you,
it's 100%.
I think so. Look, I think our initial conversations with each other, having come from very different backgrounds and very different worlds, I think it was very clear to both of us when we first met that there are a lot of commonalities in how we approach ideas and how passionate we are about ideas and about conversation. You know, one of the first exposures I had to you was someone in the religious community, a Hasidic client, saying to me, if we put you and Avi Kahan in a room and come back 12 hours later, you'll still be talking. And you'll just be like, oh, send in one kosher and one non-kosher meal. Like, it'll really be, and I think that's true. Our first conversations, I think, went 2-3 hours sometimes. I remember sitting in a parking lot outside my home and just saying, well, I'll just sit here and talk on the phone with him for another 10 minutes or whatever. And it was like 2 hours later and I'd missed dinner, you know? And I mean, because I think we are able to do that. But yeah, look, I think part of that is that I don't know that we had, I will say for me, I didn't have sufficient confidence in our friendship yet. And I didn't know you well enough to know that you wouldn't be someone who I would offend when I disagreed with them in a fundamental way. And I think there are things we might fundamentally disagree on. What I've learned,
but I would love to see how we argue that.
Yeah,
because we haven't done that yet. Well,
yeah.
It's
well,
been hypothetical. Like we know we haven't done that yet.
Yeah,
and I would love to take the
chance.
most like almost a radical topic, taboo radical topic.
Well, this is why I think gender and sex and the tie between biology, gender, and sex. If we can navigate that one, then I think we can probably handle anything.
I mean, so like what I believe we have to understand is a little bit over the history of arguments, almost like. The first killing that we know in history, so let's look at that as the first argument between two individuals, right? So let's say Cain and Abel. There was some type of argument there that led to death. Now,
this one hopefully will have a better result.
We don't know if that death was like precedent. Like they didn't have a book, what happens when two people argue. Like why was the natural thing death?
Right.
It's so curious by me. I've been thinking about this for like 20 years. I heard the Cain and Abel story when I was 5 years old, again when I was 6, again 7, 8, 9, and it hits you like no one told them. Like now I understand two people get in an argument, they push, they fight. We understand it almost normal either from books, movies, watching people in the street, reading the news. It's like a collective consciousness that said this is normal. But like by them,
it's possible that Abel was the first cancellation.
Yeah, he probably was.
Like, because death is the extreme cancellation.
It's the most extreme. But how? Like and why death? Like what would promote a human to kill when he doesn't agree with somebody? Because that's what it was.
Well, but wait a minute. I mean, I was being funny when I said it, but what is what we now call cancel culture or cancellation? What is cancellation but a form of death? It's a social death.
A social death.
It's a social death. This person is beyond redemption.
True.
So if someone says the N-word, or someone is, if someone has I don't know, they're intoxicated or they have a mental breakdown and they say the most hideous, horrible things, and unfortunately, Our worst moments can be captured on cameras now, or on TikTok, or on Instagram. So someone says or does some awful thing, and their worst, most basest nature comes out, and they say something horrible and terrible. We have now decided culturally that that is the sum total of their value in society. They are beyond redemption. There are things that you are beyond redemption once you've done them. And that is a death without
That
question.
is a clear cancellation, especially on social media. Like,
Sure.
I've discussed this one time with my parents. Like, a modern day Jewish Holocaust I would look is when you can only spend your money on social media platforms, right? And then they say, I'm sorry, you got to live in your own ghetto, Jews. What you say is not comfortable enough. And therefore, you don't have your Twitter account. You can't spend on your Instagram account. And like, there's no way to spend money except through social media platforms. Canceling people who live on social media, where there are many people who live on social media, is a
100%.
form of death. So yeah, we have nowadays death. But I want to go to the first cancellation. Yes, if Cain and Abel would have only lived on social media, it could have, he was just,
Banned from Twitter.
Cain would have just banned Abel from Twitter. And then God would have said,
Abel would
where's
have been on Truth Social, and
he would have
Cain
opened
would have
up
stayed
another
on Twitter. Yeah.
But really, how did that happen? Like, how did he cancel him? Why? Where did it come from? Why did you move to different places? I mean, there's in the biblical text Abraham, right, and his brother-in-law, who was named Lot. They were both living near Jerusalem then, and they got in a fight. They got in a fight if you're allowed to steal certain lands from other people, because you're going to get it in a few years. Big fight. And they decided to separate. Abraham told Lot, it's brought down to Genesis, you pick land, move there. He moved down south, where it flourished, to a town called Sodom. That's where he moved. And he continued living. And Abraham stayed up by Jerusalem, and he lived. Like, why kill the person? Move. You don't feel comfortable in the same room? Go out. You don't feel... Unfollow, basically. You don't have... Like, where did that hit? Where did Cain have the audacity to decide that the creator of the world... Because they didn't know a lot more than just Adam, my father, lived there, was chased out. Like, something happened over there to kill someone. It never... I mean, and look, make believe for some odd reason that you believe the biblical text is just a story. It's the first book that was written. You don't know a book that was written before, so it's a made-up story that Moses wrote. Why would he write this as the first story? Leave Garden of Eden, have the story with the snake. Second, the first real person, because Adam wasn't real. The first real biological person. First story about that biological person is I get in an argument with my brother and I kill him. That's the first story of the first biological person. Cancellation.
But I think it's about erasure, really. It's about, I think it's, I always try to look at these things from the lens of what's the emotional underpinning of it, right? Because whenever, and this relates back to my work, like if somebody comes in and they say, I want 50-50 custody of my children, a father most often, they're not actually describing to me what they want logistically. They're describing an emotional experience, a feeling that they want. I want to feel fully involved in my children's lives. Like if you say, God, I want to go on vacation, you don't actually mean like I want to go to an airport, get on a plane. You mean I want the feeling I have when I'm on vacation. I feel that my spouse has my undivided attention, my children have my attention. I feel relaxed, I feel happy, I feel like I don't have pressure and stress. So most of the time when we describe an event, what we really are doing is describing a feeling we want to have or a feeling we don't want to have, right? So if we're looking at it like Cain and Abel as a story about brothers or a story about the emotional experience, Cain is canceling Abel in the most ultimate way because I don't want to hear you anymore. I don't want you to exist. Why? Because you become I am your opposite. Like your goodness makes me feel bad. Your perspective makes me feel foolish or stupid. Your love of God makes me feel ungodly or evil. I think that it's the same story we're having currently in the world.
So let's say we look at it in a perspective. Either God told Moses or Moses figured this out on his own. I believe God told Moses. Other people believe Moses figured this out on his own. That his first story of the first biological individuals, right? That were created by a father and a mother. The first story that he's going to write about that era is someone who couldn't stand someone else's idea and killed the person.
Yes.
Okay, great.
And by killing them, tried to kill their idea.
Okay, great. Or killed their idea.
Right.
Now, the response that either Moses wrote that God said or it's actually true, whichever one, but the response that's there, I think is fascinating. What did God over there in the biblical text, you read the Old Testament, what does God tell Cain? He asked him, where's your brother?
Right.
And he says, am I my brother's watchkeeper? Like, How should I know where my brother is? And God says, well, the call and the voice of your brother is screaming from the ground.
Right.
And Cain's like, oh my gosh, God, what do I do? How do I repent? This sin is too hard to carry. And it seems like then they had a conversation that Cain said, everyone's going to kill me. God put a sign on his forehead that he should look like a deer or a unicorn, something like that, that nobody should kill him. And then there was a story, his grandson thought he was an actual animal and shot him with a bow and arrow, and that's how he died. What type of question was God asking? Or like, what was Cain revealing? Or what was Moses trying to say that all of a sudden Cain heard a voice inside of him? Where's your brother? And he told that voice. Am I supposed to walk? Like, what was happening? God wasn't a person who walked into the room. He was an idea in Cain's head. That's what God was. And he was an idea that Cain didn't fully understand until Abraham came to the world and fully explained it. So it was like, he had an idea that had a voice. It's a real trippy feeling, by the way, the biblical text.
Sure.
Cain all of a sudden killed his brother. First killing. He's like, what did I just do? I mean, he didn't even know how to kill. Right?
Right.
There's a tradition that he had to stab him over 90 times to find his heart. No one killed before. So he kills. And then he has this voice, this idea in his head that says, where's your brother? He's like, oh, I don't know. So you don't know? He's dead. Oh, I do know.
That.
How do you understand that? And the only way I think you could understand it is like, he killed and he thought he did the right thing by canceling. He really thought he did the right thing.
Sure.
He's like, that person's dangerous.
Right.
The fight that Cain and Abel had was a very simple fight. You see, they both had jobs. They both were put into this world and they had jobs. The first biological individuals that Moses wrote about had jobs. One tended to the ground, allowed things to grow, fruits and vegetables, and one tended to the sheep. Classic. That's it they had. Sure. They didn't have Tesla technology. Sure. So, and then they each had to sacrifice themselves. Because whenever you work hard for something, you must sacrifice yourself for something. Right. That means you have an idea how to tend to the sheep. That idea is how to save it from every predator, right? You have an idea how to tend to the ground, and that idea makes you wake up 5 a.m. That's an idea of how to live, and that idea judges you. Like, are you a good tender to the sheep?
Right.
Are you a good person to take care of the ground? And you're like, you know what? I guess ground could wait till 7 a.m. to be taken care of. It doesn't have to grow so nice. It doesn't have to be great. You don't have to try your best. You don't have to sacrifice your best, but then God won't accept. The ground won't grow so properly. And Abel tended to the sheep in a way that he gave himself fully up. Right. He protected them against lions, and his sheep he saw God bless them. Things were great. Right. And Cain's like, you're telling me that I have to work my fullest in order to succeed? You know what? Let me kill that.
Right.
Let me kill the people who work to their fullest.
Right.
And let me say that the main thing of accomplishment is starting your day at 7 a.m, not at 5.
Right.
And if the ground doesn't grow so well, too bad. I mean, I'm only human.
Right.
And then the voice came to him and said, are you sure you couldn't do that? Are you sure you killed an idea that might have existed that challenged you a little bit? You said, I can't live with that idea. It's too tyrannical. It's telling me to be way bigger or think more or putting pain. It's like, it's making me remember trauma maybe. It's just difficult. So you kill it. You thought it was a good thing. Your therapist said, don't speak to them. Or you decide, you know what? I'm making boundaries. I'm not going to talk to that person. I'm not going to go there anymore. I'm not going to go into cold water. I'm not going to do stuff that make me think or that challenge my body. I'm not comfortable. I'll kill all that. A voice is going to come into your head and say, are you sure you're successful in maximizing your success? Because there's a voice screaming from the ground. All the opportunities are like, you're missing opportunities in life. So I think cancellation, which exists now, has always existed. Always. Especially like in Judaism. Judaism is very, very big into sometimes canceling, sometimes by mistake and sometimes on purpose, of canceling foreign ideas or like being scared. But Cain canceled an idea of really working hard and seeing success from that idea. I think people who cancel ideas are the same thing. If someone else is saying something that makes me uncomfortable, it's like going into a cold shower. Right? Let me ask you, how often would you find, who do you think seeks a life of more comfort? Liberals or conservatives?
I actually think both. I don't think for me, I don't think it falls down party lines, because I think that in my experience, and I hate making generalizations of that kind, but conservatives used to, in my experience, live in the echo chamber more. So they were more prone to watching just Fox News, and they were more prone to, and liberals, again, I'm aging, I'm 50. 20 years ago, the world was very different than it is right now.
No, but I'm talking about specifically this in the world, and I think this always changes. That's why I'm curious your answer.
I think liberals now do the same thing, by the way. There's now an echo chamber for liberals, an echo chamber for
No, I'm not referring to that. I'm talking about the life of comfort. There are people who
But I
pursue
think
a life of
echo
comfort.
chambers exist because you want to be comfortable in your ideas,
So-
comfortable in being reinforced.
I'm
Look,
talking
I-
about, I'm
I-
talking
I-
about actual comfort of
I
life.
think, but see, to me, comfort is internal. Comfort is internal. Like if you take an ice bath every morning, after a few months, an ice bath is comfortable because you've just changed the way you feel about this particular thing. Your experience of it is different. When you exercise, when you first start exercising, it's incredibly uncomfortable. Now, not exercising is uncomfortable because I'm so accustomed to it. So comfort is a function, it's a feeling, right? Comfort's a feeling. So to me, where we run into trouble is like when are you willing to make yourself uncomfortable or let yourself be made uncomfortable?
So let me ask you more. Who is willing faster to be made? Whose idea? Who would promote the idea of trying to make your life more uncomfortable? Do you think if someone would come to, let's say, a conservative convention and promote, let's say, ice baths for sale on the outside, buy your coupons for ice baths? Do you think someone would go to a liberal convention and sell coupons for ice baths? Who do you think promotes this idea of being more uncomfortable as a survival instinct? And who do you think promotes the idea of, no, you need to be comfortable and safe? I think both do.
Yeah.
And I think it changes over years.
I would agree with that.
So that's what I'm trying to bring out as perspective.
But I
And
think
why
what
is
we're
that?
defining as unsafe, what I'd say is this. I think when you're talking about safety, which is what that is, if comfort derives from safety, right? Like I feel safe, so I'm comfortable. So I think conservatives, in my experience, and again, I'm generalizing, talk about, well, this is making you unsafe and that's making you unsafe. So, the borders are making you unsafe and drugs are making you unsafe. Liberals have a tendency to say ideas are unsafe. And that's where I've really got to a place where I've stopped being able to identify myself as a progressive liberal. I used to say it to everyone, I'm a progressive liberal in my ideologies primarily. And now I'm a little hesitant to say that because I'm not afraid of, in fact, I want to know, like I want to read the opposite perspective of a progressive
So
liberal
at what
perspective all
age
the time.
at what age in your life were you at a place that you felt unsafe to be challenged ever with ideas?
I don't think ever.
So
I don't think
even
ever.
when you identified as a progressive liberal, you were never
Yeah.
challenged.
No,
with unsafe.
I never felt unsafe when I would have challenging ideas. I was raised, as you know, very Catholic. I grew up in a very religious context. I went off to college and rejected religion entirely, and proclaimed myself an atheist at the time. But would still go to the InterVarsity Christian Fellowship meetings, mostly to heckle their speakers. And when I say heckle their speakers, I mean question their speakers in a friendly but confrontational manner, because most of the time I had read the Bible more than the members of the InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. And I used to go and challenge their speakers and present contrary
So you know
ideas.
we used to make fun when I was in university of individuals like you.
Yeah.
We used to say it like atheist is their God, atheism is their God right now, which means, and this is something really interesting that I can't figure out. When someone's on the road to pursuit for knowledge, right? They're on the road. They go to university to pursue knowledge, or they go to school to pursue knowledge. Why do they identify themselves? Shouldn't the identity be right now, I don't know, I'm pursuing knowledge. I'm going to find out.
I couldn't agree more.
So individuals who identify as atheists, we found, and I still find it like this, it's like, you got great questions. So that means you're on the pursuit to knowledge.
Right.
So you're already defining it.
Right.
That means since you don't have an answer, it's like what I was bringing up this idea before, I didn't finish explaining it. I don't believe anyone understands their ideas fully. I believe that as a philosophical approach. I only believe the only individual who ever understood ideas perfectly, that he said them and he understood what he said, is Moses, is the biblical text. After that, any prophet who wrote something after, even part of the Bible, anyone who wrote, even Abraham, what he wrote, he didn't understand his ideas perfectly. I mean, we all understand not to steal, right? I have my perspective of why not to steal, which helps me define why a person shouldn't steal. You have your perspective of why people shouldn't steal, which helps you define the terminology don't steal.
Sure.
None of us fully understand why we don't steal
Well,
yet.
we all also have conditions under which we believe that the general prohibition against stealing would be appropriate to forget about.
True, could be. But still, that doesn't give us the full understanding of what it means don't steal. We could one day be having a philosophical conversation. You'd be like, Is that what it means not to steal? You're saying it doesn't mean to steal from yourself only, from your spouse, from your children, from other people? Are you only allowed to not steal in a court of law? You can't steal with friends?
As a lawyer, I get very caught up in how are we defining the word steal.
Exactly. And so stealing is an idea that we don't fully understand yet. When you give it a definition, what you're doing is at most, you're giving a taste to the idea. Okay, a taste of not stealing, of that idea, tastes like, hey, let's be friends. What belongs to me belongs to you. Like it's like a manifestation of the idea.
Right.
Do not steal. So the way we look at it, or the way I look at it, is like God uttered this idea, don't steal.
Right.
We don't know what he meant.
Right.
But we could figure it out as we look at society.
Sure.
And those give taste to that idea till one day we'll finally figure out. Now, I don't know what that day is.
Right.
So I never care what the answer is.
But think about, so let's dive into the deeper water here right from the kiddie pool. And so let's use what you just did with don't steal, right?
Yeah.
So that one we got a real clear rule, right? God comes out, says to Moses, hey, here's 10 rules. You know, one of them is don't steal. That's pretty good. Like that's pretty clear cut, that one. And we both just
I don't think that's how God said it. He said, don't steal. And Moses is like, okay, now how do I explain to the people why not?
Right.
Now God just said, don't steal. He's like, well, give them over laws about it. Give them over examples about it.
Right.
Give them over understandings. And that way they'll come close to understanding this idea, do not steal.
But what we just agreed on, I think, when talking about don't steal, right, is that there are going to be, we have to define what it means to steal, right? We have to define, for example, if a rule is handed down, the person who made the rule, what did they mean by stealing, right? Because if you say, I've made a rule, and you can be punished if you violate that rule, okay? Your definition then is very important to me. Because if I can be punished for violating your definition of stealing, like if I go, oh no, I didn't think that was stealing, great. You made the rule and you get to enforce the rule. I need to know your definition of stealing.
So isn't that a contradiction to what I'm saying?
No, I don't think it is.
I just said basically that nobody is going to understand the idea of not stealing.
Right.
And you still get punished for not stealing. And nobody's going to understand the definition.
Right. But see, as
you're still
lawyer,
getting punished.
the lawyer in me jumps in and goes, okay, so it's incumbent on all of us, if we're in a game or in a system where there's a rule that's been made by an authority, okay, a legitimate authority. So you can say, like, you know, only God can judge me. No, a jury or your peers can too. Like, we figure out the rule set, and then we say, okay, according to this rule set, whether it's true or false, whether it's right or wrong, whether it's morally correct, whatever, it's God's will or not, the legislature has defined stealing as follows: the unlawful taking of another individual's property. Done, okay? So now, it's whether I feel like I stole or whether if it's my personal definition of stealing. No, that's the rule, right? Okay, so it's easier when we're talking about stealing because the nuance is, you know, are you guilty with a good excuse, for example? Because there are times where we could say, listen, you did steal, but the stealing was justified, you know, or you didn't have the guilty mindset. We get into mens rea and actus rea, the guilty mind and the guilty act. So if I punch you in the face, that's an assault. But if I see a killer spider, you know, that's about to bite you and I smack to kill the spider, yes, I committed an assault, but I had no intent to harm you. In fact, I was trying to help you. So in law school, this is the kind of weird stuff you do, is you just go through examples of, well, what's the exception and what's the rule? All right, so we agree. The process, right, of how, if we had to have an argument about what does it mean to steal, and under what circumstances should a person be allowed to engage in behavior that otherwise would be stealing, or that we acknowledge is stealing, or that we say is going to be exempt from the definition of stealing because it doesn't fit the mindset that's necessary for our definition of stealing? Okay, we can do that with something as safe as the idea of stealing, I think. What do you do when you get to a conversation about things that's so taboo, like gender, like biological sex? You know, how do you break that structure down? How do we start with a penis and a vagina? Do we go, okay, if you got a penis, it's this rule set. If you got a vagina, it's this rule set, or you're automatically presumed to be this thing unless you fit other criteria? Do we say this is innate and God-given? Do we say that this is entirely societal and subjective? Do we say that you have the right to identify as anything you want? If I say I'm a houseplant, I'm a houseplant. You have to refer to me as a houseplant from now on, and if you don't, it's an act of violence. I think we can all agree, like, that's a thornier example. But can we use the same process, I guess is my question. Can we use the same process we just did on something like stealing? Like, how do we define it? What are the rules for that analysis? And how do we have a conversation about different ways of looking at stealing? Can we do that with something as dangerous, thorny, possibly likely to hurt people's feelings? Which, by the way, I don't think either of you can. We disagree on a lot of things, maybe. I don't think either of us is a person who wants to hurt people. I don't want to harm anyone. I don't want to deliberately upset anyone. I'm not afraid to upset people in my professional and personal life. I upset people all the time unintentionally. But it's not the goal.
Unintentionally?
Well, look, I engage in behavior I know will upset them.
Okay.
That's my job. But am I doing it to upset them? No. Absolutely not. My goal is to accomplish the objective with as minimal casualties as possible, period. So can we do that on something as complicated as this topic?
Look, I thought about this question for a long time. And when I say a long time, I think a lot of people think about this question for a long time.
Well, how do you approach it? I mean, I just want to know how to approach it. Like, do we start with, what most people, I think, do is they start with the absurdist argument, right?
Yeah.
So they start with both positions to their logical furthest extension. Those are easy. One is to say, nope, boys have penises and you're a boy and you don't have the right to identify as anything other than a boy because that's the equipment you were given and that's who you are.
No, that's a final answer. That's not a conversation.
No, I'm saying, but these are how most people start a discussion.
Start a discussion with the answer.
Most people, and by the way, unsuccessfully. I think it's how we got in the mess we're in as a culture, is that we start with absurdist approaches. So we say, so you're saying that if you were born and assigned male at birth because you had a penis, that you have to like sports, you have to be masculine, you have to be heterosexual, you have to be any of these number of other things, and you can take it to any extreme you want to. Or if I identify as female and say I am a woman, my name is not James anymore, it's Jane, I'm going to continue to dress as a man, but you have to identify me as female because I have decided I am female. I believe I was assigned incorrectly at birth and I am female. Most people would say, well, and by the way, if I get arrested, I have to go to a female prison. And if I want to use the female restroom, even though I appear traditionally male in my gender presentation, I have the right to do that because if you say to me, Jim, you're not female in any way, you're committing an act of violence against me, essentially. So those are the two extreme opinions. And I think anybody, like a not even a law student, I think a 10-year-old could probably point out what's wrong with both of those things, right? So starting there,
because those are not arguments; those are answers. You're starting with your opinion, with answers.
Yeah.
Look, I want to tell you something interesting. Have you ever wondered why Jewish people wear black?
I just thought it's because it's slimming and it looks cool.
First of all, yes.
Yeah.
But that's not the
that's
whole.
That's why I wear black.
Well, that's not the whole reason of the idea.
Yeah. First I thought it was a Johnny Cash thing, but then I realized he's not Jewish.
Black, believe it or not. So Judaism started. The idea of Judaism started from Abraham. He understood what it means to be a god, and he gave that over to his son Isaac, who gave it to his son Jacob, who then manifested the full understanding of Judaism and had 12 children, or minimum 12 children, that created tribes. And there was the tribe of the scholars, and their diamond was black. Now, why was there a tribe of scholars, and what was scholars? So scholars have a crazy Hebrew word to it. They're called students of wisdom. You see, there are some people who are students of understanding, and there's some people who are students of wisdom, students of logic. You see, you could get knowledge, and this has been written, and we could discuss who wrote this, but this has been written throughout the philosophers. There's two ways to acquire knowledge, one through understanding and one through logic. You go outside and you want to have understanding of the weather. You go outside and you feel, you understand.
Right,
and then there are people who have logic to it. Well, the sun's there, this is there, and they understand things through the eyes of logic. You go to court and you're afraid of your verdict. The lawyer has a logical fear that he's going to lose. And the plaintiff or the defendant has an emotional fear he's going to lose. He understands that he's going to lose through a place of just understanding, pure understanding. It's like you fear. You wake up in the morning sick. Like there's so much understanding. There's sometimes even extra understanding. Like you wake up sick, you're nauseous, and then you're like, oh, I forgot that I have this pain. And then there's just logic, students of logic. And the tribe of scholars have always been identified black, and we could discuss why black in a second. They're always identified as black, and they're known as students of wisdom, students of logic, not students of understanding. And the idea goes back, and this is from before Epictetus and Socrates, and like I read books nowadays that are discovering this idea, and like they think they're like Sam Harris, he thinks he's the controller of this idea. How does will of a person manifest into their body? People want stuff. They lust for certain things. They can't describe. We discussed this on the phone yesterday, and we discussed this many, many, many times. You cannot explain why you like certain things generally, especially women, men. You cannot explain what you like, but you have this will, the power of will. You have this want. You can't explain it. Now, you can go to a therapist, and you could bring it back to a Freudian understanding of your mother, and we could discuss that. But you have this will, and now you could discuss, do I want to understand this will? Or do I want to have logic to this will? Do I want to go down to Freudian path and say, hey, why do I love girls that look like this? Oh, because you have an attachment to your mother because of this type of trauma. That reminds you. Do I want to live my life as a student of that? Or do I want to live my life of like, okay, I understand. I am attracted to this. So what do I do with that understanding? Create certain knowledge. Let's go get married. Let's build a family, right? So I created knowledge through the same understanding without logic, right? Two ways to manifest will. So will is over here. Like will is above your head. Like it's in your crown. It's above your head. It can manifest in your body through wisdom to knowledge or through understanding to knowledge. When you want to argue at anything, you got to be students of knowledge, not students of understanding. Like this. Words are known as black words on white paper, right?
In the law, we call it black letter law.
Black letter law, which is the idea that the white is over here. And if I want to identify the white, I put black on it, and then words come out. Now, without the white, I can't have the word there either. Right. So it's black written on white. So law, or Judaism, is known as black fire written on white fire. The white fire is the understanding of the world. What's going on? How do you understand how to live? You go outside. I understand we can't steal. I understand that because it doesn't make sense. I don't want you to steal from me. So yeah, I could create a rule, love thy neighbor. Don't do unto your friend what you don't want done to yourself, and I'll understand not to steal. Great. And I can live my life then through a logical way, which is more defined, which is getting more precise, which is creating law, which is the black letters. The whites are more the emotions, and the black letters are more of wisdom. And now when you want to debate something, do you debate it as a student of emotions? Which is like, well, I don't understand then how we can live if we can't agree to this and this. Let me kill you, bang. I'm not understanding that. If you're going to say that I can't accept that, then your thing doesn't make sense. Like, and that's the debate that you were bringing before. That's a student of understanding. Or you could have a student of logic and wisdom and say, hey, where's this coming from? Where are you coming from? How do we define what is true, what is not true? How do we set terms to our negotiations? Feeling free that we don't even ever have to come to an understanding. We don't care. But we want to know on the road how we should live our life. What knowledge should we bring in? You know, as I was driving in here, I was thinking, when you drive up to work, all the stuff that you see affects you, right? So I was thinking, when you drive up and you make a turn, what do you see that affects you?
Well, I drive past the Chabad.
So I saw that, right? Yeah. So I saw you hit the Chabad every morning.
Every morning.
And how does that affect your day in conversations? So I'm like, first, does he know what Chabad even means?
Yeah, I do, only as a function of the clients I've represented.
Okay, so what? I'm very curious.
I know what the word Chabad
So let me tell you, the word is fascinating. Okay. You see, Chabad really originated and manifested so crazy. Chabad originated in the early 1700s. It really hit peak in 1770, the idea. And they were the founders of the idea every single person's created in the divine image of God. Which 4 years later, 1776, hey, every single individual is created in the divine image of God, right? They were the ideas of not ask your country what it could do for you, ask what you could do for your country. They said, like, if God would have just made me a water carrier, I said I would happily do the job. Like, I'm here to work for you. Like, they created a lot of these ideas.
Yeah, these kinds of
and then they moved to a city, and they believed that God, this was divinely done. They moved to a city in Russia called Lubavitch, City of Love. Right? It was a city, I've done research, and maybe this city full of brothels also, right? A city of tremendous love. Yeah, a lot of love. It was more of a hippie city. And he instituted there to bring his understanding called Chabad. Chabad means these words. Cha, ba, d. It's 3 letters put together that spell Chabad. The ch stands for the word wisdom. The b stands for the word understanding. The d stands for the word knowledge. In Hebrew, it's chachma, bina, das. Spells out the first letter of each word. It's if knowledge marries understanding. I'm sorry, if logic marries understanding, you give birth to knowledge.
Huh.
And that's their understanding of their life. And then he said, let's move to a city full of love, Lubavitch, and let's marry the Chabad custom, which is knowledge, then understanding, knowledge plus understanding, wisdom plus understanding equals knowledge. You see, I grew up in schools that understand totally differently. They say you do knowledge, right, equals, but you go backwards, understanding plus wisdom. That means we start from like what we start what the facts are. What do we want to be knowledgeable about? But they're both true, total different understandings of philosophy. But they call their name. When they wake up in the morning, when any kid says, "Hey, I'm a Chabad," what he means to say is, I look at the world through knowledge plus understanding equals. I'm sorry, I keep on saying this. Wisdom plus understanding equals knowledge. That's who I am. So when they're going to get into an argument about genders, first they're going to say, well, what's the knowledge on the topic before understanding? See, you jumped, which most people do, everybody does, let's have this topic about understanding or about knowledge. Either how much we know about the topic or understanding how life has to be. Well, I don't feel safe if you're not going to understand my gender for numerous amounts of reasons, by the way, because people who can't figure out their identity, and it takes them years to figure it out, and they start from whatever young age, they live through crazy trauma that makes them feel unsafe. Yeah. And they're easy to get abused very easily when they're not identified properly. They don't know who they are. So it's huge trauma that's available. Sure. I don't feel safe anymore. I was hurt. I had a company who called me that when Roe versus Wade came out, their HR didn't like their division in the company, sent them a letter and said, you guys have to come out with a statement against Roe versus Wade. And they're like, okay, why? And these were Orthodox Jews. They're like, well, people in the marketing company feel that if you're a white man and you have the power to rape them, and now you're going to say they can't have an abortion, they don't feel safe working here. It's like a place of understanding. Yeah, it's true. If you're living life of how do I understand how to live through an emotional aspect of which is godly, which is beautiful, you'll come to a certain type of argument. But if you first take it from the step of knowledge and what that means, and then you add my understanding, I keep on saying knowledge, I don't know why. You first take it from the place of logic, and then you add understanding, you'll equal the proper knowledge of how you should live.
Knowledge. Yeah, so
the question is, what's the logic over here?
If I hear you clearly, and I like this way of looking at it, I didn't know that about Chabad. I think that it's probably had a subliminal effect on me, perhaps, every time I pass it now. Because I even see in my own profession, like, to have knowledge, like true knowledge of value, I have to have wisdom and understanding, right? So wisdom, I have to know the law. Like I have to know black letter law.
Black letter.
Understanding, I have to know what is my client thinking, what are they feeling,
the therapist,
what do they need from me, what does the judge need from me. So this is
and that will equal verdict.
Equals
let's say.
True,
so now
what's the
so now I'm going to ask you a very pointed question.
If I only have one of those two tools,
exactly.
I don't understand.
So now, what do you think? Is it lawyer plus therapist equals knowledge, or therapist plus lawyer equals knowledge? And that's a very complicated question.
Well, I think what I would say is either of those perspectives alone doesn't equal knowledge.
We're on the same page for that.
Yeah.
But here, do we start with the therapist first? So you're dealing with a divorce case. Yeah. Both have to speak in front of the judge. Who should speak for the judge? Is the knowledge, let's say, is how you should, is the verdict, is the knowledge.
Right.
It should be lawyer plus therapist equals judge, or therapist plus lawyer equals judge.
I brought back to I think it was Schopenhauer who said, and I'm paraphrasing, that we like to say that as humans, we are thinking machines that sometimes feel. And in fact, we are feeling machines that sometimes think.
True, and we're going to get to that.
And so to me,
but make believe you have to separate.
Start with
lawyer,
I like
only
to
law.
Start. Yeah.
Only that means we separate it. We got to separate the emotions for a second because it's all in one body. Right. But I'm trying to separate our bodies now.
100%.
Inside we have law, which is knowledge. Which is logic.
Right.
And then we have emotions, which is wisdom. We have our therapist inside ourselves, and we have our lawyer inside ourselves. Right. Now we're taking them out and we're presenting to the judge.
Yeah.
What's knowledge? Like, what should we do now? Who should the judge listen to first? Now, you're not supposed to give any emotions, even though you might have, and the therapist is not supposed to give any law. But let's try to the best of our capability, because you're right. The great mystics said that in knowledge, there's the emotions of knowledge and the knowledge of knowledge.
Yeah.
And then in wisdom, there's emotions of wisdom and wisdom of wisdom. But that's already a deeper step, right? But let's try to our best to separate it. And the judge says, okay, I need to make a decision. And now you're like, well, Your Honor, I think you should hear me first before you hear the therapist, before you make the decision. What would be your argument for that? It would
The argument for it, I think, would be by approaching this from a logic first, as opposed to wisdom or feelings, right? When in our quest for knowledge, true knowledge, I think when we dispassionately, to the extent we can, try to look at the mathematics of our position, right? The good and the bad, the pro and the con. So my arguments for, the other side's arguments against, not emotional arguments, not what feels just. Because like justice, fairness is a feeling. This feels fair to me. But the math of it, you know, what they do the first year in law school is teach you to think like a lawyer, which is don't look at emotions, take that out of the equation to the extent possible, and look at rules and look at definitions. And so I, of course, because I'm a law school survivor, I tend to be of the mind that let's look at definitions, let's look at structure of our argument, let's look at rules, let's look at the other side's definitions, let's make sure we're using the same definitions in the beginning of our conversation.
You're not selling me on an argument of why I should hear you before the therapist.
Because I think our feelings can have almost no tie to logic.
You're right. You're Mr. Logic.
Right.
She's Mrs. Therapist.
Right.
And it's going to equal a judge. And you're saying she wants to talk first because she knows when you're going to set the tone in a certain legal way, and she wants to talk first. And you're like, no, Your Honor, I believe the way we could acquire the truth, which is knowledge, right, is by you first hearing the law. Unemotionally, unequivocally, what the law demands us to say, then we let the therapist argue out their thing, and that's going to equal true knowledge. And the judge says, nah, tell me why. Tell me why I should hear you before her. Why I should hear logic before understanding.
It's a great question. I guess my off-the-cuff response would be that feelings can be so subjective that they're not as reliable. And I think although facts come with points of view and facts can be informed by our emotional state or by our feelings, I think they are more immutable. They are less transient. Like how I feel can be swayed by so many things. Am I hungry? Am I tired? Am I lonely? Did I have a good or bad experience last night or this morning? That it's so potentially subjective. And by the way, it can also be so arbitrary, right? Because you may just say, you know, I don't like this thing. It makes me feel bad. Why? I don't like clowns. I'm afraid of clowns. Why? You never been traumatized by a clown? I don't know. It's just a feeling I have. It's totally subjective. It's not tied. It's not.
Yeah, but what you're doing, you're invalidating over here. No, you're invalidating emotions. That means what the judge told you now. The judge said, "This is my decision. My decision is that I'm going to make a real decision soon. Who should have these children, right?" And you're like, "Okay, Your Honor." She said, "I'm missing something. I'm missing here a little bit law. I have a bunch of questions and a little bit understanding, emotions. Right. So I want to hear from the lawyer and the therapist. What I want them to do is both come into a room, and I'm going to make believe I know nothing, and I want each to share with me their final opinion, both lawyers and both therapists, and I'm going to make a decision." Okay. And I'm going to take both into account. Plus, it's not times, it's not divided. It's going to be lawyer plus therapist is going to equal my decision. And you're like, Your Honor, you must hear me first.
Yeah, because I guess as you're speaking, I'm thinking this through. And I think the reason why I would want to approach it that way, aside from protection of my own profession, is that the emotional pieces will make more sense and be easier to deem rational or irrational, okay, or subjective, purely subjective, or tied to some objective standard, if I understand the factual underpinnings first. So if I can present either as an advocate or if I'm being really like a good boy and I'm just trying to like search for justice. So I want to help the judge understand the facts, good, bad, or indifferent. Here are the facts. They were married this long. This is how this one goes to the pediatrician. This one doesn't. This one does. You know, lay out underlying facts. Then the emotional stuff that can provide context. Why did you do what you did? Why did you take the responsibilities you did or didn't do. But I think starting with these immutable facts, these things that we both agree are true. Yes, I agree. I was home with the kids. I agree. You were at work. The other stuff, the idea of, yeah, but I did that because I believed that was the right thing for me to do, or I thought that's what you wanted me to do. That's all the emotional stuff that is so subjective.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, you believe the way you derive to knowledge, the truth, is that law sets the lens, it sets the scope, it tells you how to look at the emotions. It says, hey, you could look at this like dad wasn't home, or you could look at it through dad wasn't home. And I'm telling you to look at it through this lens, this legal lens, based on the ramifications.
Right. So if the judge is a chef, okay, who's trying to make a meal, and the best meal possible, which is justice, right? So let's first talk about the ingredients. Like, what do we have to cook with?
True.
We've got chicken, we've got tomatoes, we've got a whole bunch of stuff. Now, you might listen to that list of ingredients and go, that sounds like chicken parmesan. It's all
so
the
what
ingredients.
you're saying is that law, right, creates the platform of how to talk about the understanding of what happened.
It creates the ingredients with which we can then
controls
say,
the understanding.
Here's what we do with this. Here's the best use of these
So
ingredients.
the law controls the understanding to equal the knowledge.
Yes.
Okay. So do you understand that the therapist is going to feel controlled by the lawyer then? And is going to feel that the law is tyrannical.
Sure.
So the therapist, the understanding, is going to object.
Right.
And to say, well, this is maybe... He's controlling my narrative almost, and he's allowing the knowledge to look this way because he went first. Okay, so you're saying a positive, and
But I also have to just stop you because I don't know, although I understand primacy, recency, and repetition as an advocate, I don't know that going first, like clients come to me all the time as an advocate and they say to me like, well, we got to go first. We got to speak first.
No.
And I always say, well, wait a minute, just because you go first doesn't mean I'm more important. It doesn't mean
100%,
that
but
my
over
argument's
here,
going to be more persuasive.
over here, if the judge is saying it, that I'm going to look at it through this lens lawyer, lens emotions, lens therapist, which is going to equal the answer. That's my sunglasses.
Right.
And therefore, my answer is going to come to a certain perspective, which is not going to be the same if we do understanding plus knowledge. It's not going to be this. We're agreeing on that. There's going to be a fight. What the judge should hear first. One opinion is going to fight. Judge, hear the law before you hear it.
But is anyone arguing don't hear? Like if we're looking at lawyer and therapist, I would never argue don't listen to the therapist.
I'm
and
agreeing.
I don't think the therapist say don't listen to the lawyer.
The equation is Chabad. The equation is knowledge plus understanding. I keep on saying this. Logic plus emotions, lawyer plus therapist equals knowledge. And the therapist is saying, this is not working. It's not equaling an honest knowledge because I'm controlled by the lawyer. He's controlling my narrative. Let's flip it for a minute. Let's say it's not Chabad, right? It's Bechad, right? It's totally, it's emotions, therapist plus lawyer equals knowledge. So why would you advocate for that, let's say? Advocate the opposite. Advocate your honor. I think the therapist has to go first.
Sure.
In order for the judge to understand the law, and that's going to equal knowledge. What would be the argument for that?
I think the argument for that would be that setting conditions where people feel understood is important, right? I mean, that's why I think in both of our work, if we're working, for example, with a divorcing couple, you want people to feel heard. You want them to feel validated. You want them to feel that you're listening, right? So that's a great invitation. That's a great opportunity to say, tell me how you feel. I'm honoring or validating how you feel. Like, I think this is something that we're really, particularly on the progressive left, very invested in. The idea that, well, how does this make someone feel? We should be thinking about how it makes someone feel. And if we are kind people and loving people, we don't want to just hurt people for no reason. We don't want to make people feel invalidated or bad for no reason. So we may have to make someone feel bad when we start talking logic and we start talking, but we're not doing it for that reason. And allowing people, letting the therapist go first, frames the dialogue as, okay, everyone should feel heard. Everyone should feel that their perspective is valuable, that what they feel, even if it's subjective, that's okay. That it's okay to say, I have these feelings. And there's no good or bad feeling. They're just, you feel what you feel. You can't, you can apologize for how you feel. You can say, I wish I felt otherwise, but you feel how you feel.
So you would agree to this statement that started being, no one's really sure if this comes from Christians or from Jews, but it's been accepted now in Judaism that it comes from Jews. So I hope we're not mistaken. But Jung wrote a lot about this. I mean, Jung did a fascinating job on this. do you believe there's a structure in the human conscious that should look like a diamond, basically? It should be like want, what I want, right? Manifest into me through logic. I can understand what I want logically, or I can understand what I want emotionally, and it falls into knowledge. Every human has I want, they don't know where that comes from. You know, that's above their head. It's like a hat, right? And that comes into the body, and now it could go down 2 tracks, through my therapist, through my lawyer, and then it falls to an answer. That's how humans think. You agree to that?
Yeah, I would
Every
agree
human.
with that. I would agree
That
with that.
mystical archetype, that structure in the human conscious, which is want, knowledge, wisdom. Oh my gosh. Want, logic, wisdom, knowledge, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because I think
Now,
fundamentally our society, and I've said this to you before, I think a lot of the dialogue is providing people real solutions to imaginary problems and imaginary solutions to real problems.
True.
You know, so I'm lonely. You know what I need? I need to join this club.
Well,
or I
where
need
did
to
you
do
go
that.
then? When you just did that, lonely was the will. Was
Emotion.
the lonely was the will.
Right.
Now you want to know. You want to define that emotionally or logically.
Right.
Which one do you want to do? When you get that feeling of loneliness, and you need to define it. Why am I lonely? You define it emotionally or logically, because that's going to come to the knowledge.
Right. I start with the emotion, but that's because I've been in therapy too long.
Well, we're talking about now, and this is really, really cool. If ideas, which that's the definition of God.
Right.
God is an idea. The question is who fully understands that idea and how it's understood and manifested. Ideas judge you. We agree on that. We've spoken about that together many times. Ideas judge you. Like Socrates in Plato's work, you know, The Last Days of Socrates, he had these ideas that judged him. And he told his friends, I'm not going to run away because the idea of running away judged me and told me I shouldn't run away. So I will die instead, right? So the idea that judges you, right? Okay, that's your will. So you come up, you don't even know how you came up with this idea that it's nice to be nice to people. You don't even know. It's just some will that you have. And now it's going to judge you that you have to know about it over here.
Right.
Now you could express it through emotions and you could express it through knowledge, through logic. Okay? And so basically you have your idea, which is judging you to understand that idea fully. So the idea has to go from the top of the diamond, that's from your will, to the bottom, right, which is knowledge. So you're now presenting your idea in front of the judge, right? Which chamber should go first? Your logic or your emotions before you answer to yourself? Could you do this? You do this. The archetype. Jung wrote about this. Lurianic expressions wrote about this. I mean, this is an archetype. I mean, there are those that say the cross is the structure. Want, right? Logic and wisdom manifest to knowledge, right? And it's the Father, the Holy Spirit, which is logic and wisdom, and manifest to the Son. I mean, you have this in every religion.
Doesn't it feel like it's also a chicken or egg? Because the problem I have with that analysis is, for example, you use the example of it's good to be nice to people, okay? Well, I can explain logically why it's good to be nice to people, effective altruism, you know, it could even be a selfish motivation.
You could explain emotionally also. You could do both.
Right, but
which
here's
one
the problem.
comes first?
If I explain it emotionally, the question you still have to ask is, well, it feels good to be kind to people. But does it feel good because there is some innate thing within you that recognizes the goodness of being kind? Or is it that you've been raised in a society where you're rewarded for being kind to people, and therefore when you're doing something that comports with that societal norm, you now feel reinforced and you feel, of course I feel good about this. You know, to tie it to a religious context, I was raised extremely Catholic. I spent a lot of time in churches. I'm not a Catholic anymore. But when I go to a foreign country, I love going to a church, and I feel something very powerful when I go into a church. Now, you could argue, and certainly I've had Christian friends who argue, oh, that's the presence of God. You're feeling your connection to God. You're feeling your... Okay, that may be true. There's no way for me to prove or disprove that. It may just be that I'm feeling something that's familiar to my childhood. The scent of the incense and the feeling of that room is similar to the churches I went to as a child. So maybe I'm just having an experience that emotionally doesn't have to do with God putting something in me or having me feel something. It may just be that, oh, you're having a sensation that's familiar to you that reminds you of a pleasant childhood experience. how do
So
you
wait,
say
exactly? So you just now bought. It could be logical. It could be
Right.
from my childhood,
Right.
or it could be emotional. It could be from God.
Right.
Right. Now, when you want to have that conversation to figure out which one it is,
Right.
you first jump logically, first,
Sure.
and the logic now could tell you, okay, there's no logic. Why I should be having these feelings? There's no logic for it. So I'm not going to use logic now as the tool to hit knowledge. Because there's no logic why this smell. I was never in such a situation before. My grandfather, my parents, even when my mother's
Right.
pregnant with me, we
Right.
weren't there.
Right.
There is zero logic why this should bring up a good memory. This has to be an emotional experience.
Which only works if you don't believe in the unconscious mind. Like because
True.
Freud would say, "Oh no, you have a memory
True.
before memory,"
Freud was
or
a
Jung
logical.
would say, "You're in the collective unconscious."
Well, what I believe, let's say, you see, I'm gonna ask the question this way: logic, emotions, right? That means we have you want what you want, your idea. Your idea is gonna manifest to judge you, to your knowledge. It's gonna come through logic and emotions. If I would tell you that one is masculine and one is feminine, which one would you say is masculine, logic or emotions? And which one would you say is feminine, logic or emotions? Who's the lawyer plus therapist?
My first thought, because I don't know if it's my conditioning or if it's whatever. My first thought was logic is masculine, emotion is feminine.
That's why generally therapists are women and lawyers are men, right? Generally, maybe now it's changing, but the picture, if I would have to pick an average 1900 lawyer, is a man.
And that comports to, again, I'm tying it to logic, or my own logic, right? Or my own lived experience, is more of the men I know, okay, are very logical in their approach to situations, very problem solving in their approach to situations. And more of the women I know are better at navigating the emotional context of something.
Beautiful.
And certainly of the men and women I know, and I think it's a function of hormones and of menstruation and of those kinds of things, that I definitely know, like, the women in my life have been more likely to have their mood fluctuate as a function of other factors.
You said that so
than I would
politically
be.
correct.
I try.
Wow.
Well, I'm a lawyer, man.
Wow.
But
I
but it's true.
But I understand you say you see women as more emotional and men as more masculine and more logical, right?
Basically,
now
yeah,
we discussed you can't get to the judge, you can't get to the
Yeah.
knowledge without any of those parts. So you need masculine plus feminine.
100%.
So now let me ask you: is it masculine plus feminine that equals knowledge? Or is it feminine plus masculine that equals knowledge? Is it lawyer plus therapist, therapist, lawyer? Which do you think is a better approach?
You keep trying to pin me down to this, but
Well, you know what? So
I'm
you
not
you
married to
so
either
wait,
of
you
those
said
concepts.
you
I think
said
there's value in either
okay.
approach.
So but you agree that you're going to come to two different answers. The knowledge will be different. It depends what you do first. What?
See, you seem so. But I'm sorry to push back
No,
on this, but I
please.
got to tell you, why does which one we start with matter so much?
You
to
said that.
you?
It didn't matter to me.
It
You
doesn't
said,
matter to me.
Well, you told
Doesn't
me
matter
that
to
you're going to
me.
get two different answers. If you do
If
one
you
of it
just
first.
do one.
No, you said if you do one first. If first the lawyer speaks and then the therapist speaks,
Well,
you
I
might
think-
get one
yeah.
answer.
So
the
here's
therapist
right.
and the,
So I think if you go emotion first, if you go the story first, right? If you go the emotional story first, your emotional, the observer, right? The judge, their reaction is going to be very much informed by this very subjective thing. That would be my issue with it.
Okay.
So if you go in first and just tell, so if we started a criminal trial, not with here's where the victim was, here's where the alleged perpetrator was, here's what happened. If we start with the alleged perpetrator telling you their life story, the sympathy that you would have for that person
would taint too much the law.
Right, it would taint your view of the facts.
So if you're trying to determine knowledge, you agree that the lawyer should go before the therapist. If not, it will taint it too much.
I think so.
So the masculine has to go before the feminine in order for the proper knowledge to happen. Not my words.
You know, if they just take that
I know, you're in
soundbite,
trouble.
you're canceled. Like,
But-
I'm still on Twitter. You're gone.
But you understand, this is what you're saying, not me. I have a different understanding.
Nice. Throw it on me.
You
Yeah, that's
said
great.
that the lawyer has
Throw
to
the
speak
guy
before
under
the
the bus.
therapist.
That's great.
Wait,
No,
wait,
that's
well,
super.
James, you said the
Yeah.
lawyer has to speak to first before the therapist in order to get knowledge. Black has to go before white.
Did I just commit a hate crime? That is
Yeah.
really,
well, I'm going to save you. I'm
God,
going to
it's
save
not
you.
even 9.
I'm going to save you because I'm not Chabad. You
Yeah.
did Chabad. I'm going to tell
Yeah.
you how to fight in a
Okay,
second.
great.
But before that,
It was nice knowing you.
you said something really, really cool that I think you would find fascinating. You said, well, this really reminds you what came first, the chicken or the egg.
Mm-hmm.
Like, What comes first, masculine or feminine before masculine? It's like what came first? Do you know that if you Google what came first before the chicken or the egg, you will not find an answer almost anymore?
Really?
Yeah, they took it all off Google, every answer.
Interesting.
Isn't it weird? Only science answers. The first
The
8
chicken
pages
lobby,
of Google,
maybe, I don't know.
the first 8 pages of Google, the first 8 pages of Google will tell you, 8 full pages with 10 researches per page, will tell you this question is not relevant because science already has the answer. It's not a take away the, and it bothered me. Why was this taken off?
Right.
Like either it was taken off because not enough people clicked on it. That's an easy answer.
Yeah.
Right. So not enough people care about philosophy anymore. Like not enough people care about what came first, the chicken or the egg.
I mean, should this
or
have
like,
been our first topic?
or if a tree falls in a forest, doesn't make noise, or if a husband's in a room without his wife, is he wrong? These are really important questions to discuss, and like it's off the internet, and you know I think it's an unanswered question. You see, I'm not sure what you said. I think you said that masculine comes before feminine because you're a lawyer and you've been practicing these so much. I believe that in order to write black words, you need white paper first, right? You can't figure out what to define if you don't know what's out in the world. That means you said even your law is biased from emotions.
Sure.
Right? So you said, yeah, it's not a fair question because my law is emotional. So I tricked you into a question. I'm really not impressed that you couldn't get out of it. I tricked you. I said lawyer plus therapist equals knowledge. And you should have said my lawyer has a therapist lawyer in it.
Well, but
I see facts through emotions.
I think
what
I said was that I don't think the division is that clear because so much of, as I said, like biology is ideology, like science is informed by our emotional experience of things. So I don't think it's as clear
So
of a
if
division.
I was the therapist, I would have told if you would have gave your speech to the judge, you said, Judge, if you don't hear my law first, it's going to be tainted.
Right.
And I would say to the judge, I would be like, Your Honor, I really feel you have to hear the therapist first. And the arguments like this, his law that he's expressing, I know is coming from an emotional understanding of the world. And therefore, you are hearing the therapist before the lawyer anyways. And therefore, I think the therapist should actually then talk and the lawyer shouldn't play therapist. And the judge would be like, what did he just say? It's like when Ben Shapiro says facts don't care about your feelings. And you're like, well, who wrote the facts?
Right.
Individuals who care about feelings.
Right.
And this is a debate that I would love to debate because this is, I think, the pronoun debate. What comes first, law or custom? Which is what comes first, masculine or feminine, black or white? You see, was it first customary to not steal? And then Moses went on the mountain, looked down at the Jews and said, don't steal, don't this, don't this, don't this. God, bring all these laws down. Because if he would have came down and said something that the Jews didn't believe in, they would have ran away like they did every other time. They ran away when he said other stuff. They didn't listen to Moses. I mean, the biblical text of Exodus has tons of stories.
Isn't this adult, like, look, isn't it simpler to look at this like, because I've always tried to look at the biblical narratives as a function of like God is the grown up and humans are these kids. And like as someone who had kids, when you're 3, I don't say, don't hit your brother. Why? Because your brother has a lived emotional experience and a right to experience bodily autonomy, and you shouldn't impinge upon that. And also from a functional altruism place, you don't want someone to impinge on your bodily autonomy, so you should treat people with the manner that you wish to be treated. You just go, don't hit your brother. Why? Because if you do hit your brother, you're gonna get in trouble, and you're not allowed to watch TV. You can't have ice cream. So I feel like, again, having read the Old Testament, or what we call the Old Testament, it was always like God was just going like, what do you do? What is with the calf? No, don't do the calf. Why? And rather than sitting there and going, look, because if you worship graven images, that you're going to be removed from the focus as being on the divine. He just went, you just don't do it because if you do, you're going to have plagues. I don't know. Like he just was, how am I going to threaten you? So to me, a lot of this comes down to the idea of like, well, what is more appropriate? How people feel? Like, do we have to dig? Because again, like, call people whatever pronouns they want. You tell me your pronouns are thee, thou. Okay, man, whatever. I'm not a dick. I'll call you thee, thou. Like what? Because I don't want to be fighting with you. But this is not the hill to die on.
Yeah, but I don't want you to call me by that because you don't want to fight with me. I want you to call me because I want you to respect me like that.
But so you want me to feel a particular way?
Yeah.
Is what you want me to? Okay.
I know, or maybe. You see. That's if we were discussing by a therapist. What you see, this argument. You see, this is going to be a very cool part, and I hope we're going to be alive for it. Right, I shouldn't say that as a Jew, but I don't know why I really do. When the pronoun argument's going to hit the court,
Jews are not allowed to say they hope they'll be alive.
No. For this topic, I'll explain you why.
Because I can say I hope you'll be alive.
No. I'll explain you why in a minute.
Great.
But
yeah.
This topic of pronouns will hit the court in a very significant way one day, because that's what happens. You see, I look at the world and I studied this from Exodus also. The pharaohs were like this. I look at the world that there's custom, right? Custom slowly trickles down until one person says we got to create law because people are starting to argue. That person's the ruler. He turns the king.
Right.
It's like
That's
if you
the
take
parent.
a bunch of you even see it by kids. You take a bunch of kids and you put them in a room, and you say play. You walk 10 minutes later, they're all playing. Yes, and what are you playing? I don't know. Not sure. Oh, we hit each other. Tag. How hard are you allowed to push? I don't know. And there's one kid who's calling out the rules. Right? That's the leader. That's the Moses. He's like, I know the rules of the game. You're allowed to push this hard. And he studied everybody enough. And he created, so that's custom. They play people. So they came into the desert. They were born, the Jewish people, they came into the desert and they just started bickering and fighting and dealing with stuff. And Moses realized the rules and he wrote the rules down. And that was the biblical text, the rules. Don't steal, don't this. Then there's new custom.
But I would argue that, by the way, the therapist came first in that example.
The custom came first?
Right.
Yeah,
because
100%.
Moses is like, all right, everybody's fighting and nobody's happy. Like, a lot of people are unhappy, and that's not good. Just like with the kids in the room. You put the kids in the room, they start playing a game, and the one kid stands up and says, oh, no, we're not allowed to hit that hard. Or, oh, no, that person's in.
So that's the lawyer, right? That's the lawyer, and everyone else was the therapist.
You're trying to impose order on the
look,
chaos,
James, you gotta
and
remember,
that order is coming from feelings.
So chaos comes before order. Emotions come before knowledge. Equals emotions come before logic, which equals knowledge. Not the lawyer speaks before the therapist. You're saying the therapist spoke before the lawyer, but then this is what happens. All of a sudden, people start acting. The world moves on. The world evolves. New things happen, and the law didn't speak about those new things. So now you have to start comparing new custom to old law. So the law, who's not defined enough to deal with these customs yet, turns tyrannical automatically. It's like, I'm controlling the customs from evolving, basically. It's like in The Lion King, we don't go to that area. We don't go outside. I forgot the common ground. We don't go where the hyenas are. It's not defined over there. There's no law there. It's chaos. So once you have order's petrified of chaos. It's petrified. It holds chaos back. But chaos blows up one day because the law didn't manifest, didn't catch up. And now we have a world full of custom again that has to be redefined. So the battle of custom law, custom law is just ever evolving from the beginning of creation.
So wait, and again, this is a hell of a question to be asking, especially to a rabbi. So if the law doesn't catch up to custom, okay, or if custom, let me rephrase it. If custom has outpaced or modified from what law was, okay, do you update the law? Or do you change the custom?
You just asked
That's like the
question.
$1 billion question.
You have to understand, the whole idea of thus spoke Zarathustra, if I'm pronouncing the word right, Nietzsche's work, that whole book, which I promise you, you read it, you feel like you're high, like who knows?
100%.
It's almost.
When I went to college, like every college freshman who wears black and has long hair, I read a lot of Nietzsche.
It's like almost, trust me, it's almost like Jewish work. That means there's a lot of Jewish work that quotes Nietzsche, and the whole idea just to, I don't know when the last time you read it, just to remind you, Nietzsche basically wrote, it's so arrogant of him, I don't know how he did it and got away with it. Nietzsche basically made believe he's a prophet, coming to the town square to rebuke them, which was done in the Jewish text, in the biblical text. We have like 24 of those books, right, which are just like, and that's where he has this conversation about the Ubermensch, the Superman, and and he starts like, man is a tightrope, all those great parables, and then he says, and he came to the marketplace, and he started running around screaming, there is no God. God is dead. We have killed him. And the town people were laughing. Well, where's this God that you're looking for? Why do you have blood? I forgot the exact terminology. And he's like, well, you've murdered God. And Nietzsche's work is explained like this. The custom is getting more and more radical. There's soon going to be no law behind the custom, which means there's going to be no God behind the customs. There's going to be no ideas behind your understanding. Because we said there's ideas first. Then it manifests into understanding or logic, which equals knowledge. Those ideas are godly. Those ideas are my God, the God of not stealing. Those are ideas. Nietzsche's like, those ideas are dead. Your custom that you want knowledge to, you can't go back and you can say, well, what would God say? Because the new topics, the new customs have no God. And that's such a nihilistic approach. I believe, honestly, that led to a lot of great leaders saying, oh my gosh, society's dead. You know what we got to do? We got to kill everybody and start again, especially people who are not going to agree with our philosophies. That means I believe someone like Adolf Hitler read, or Stalin, saw Nietzsche's work and he's like, oh my gosh, the new customs have no God behind it. We got to figure out how to create law. It's like, you know why they put Socrates to death? Socrates was put to death for a great reason. They said he doesn't believe in any gods. because Socrates always had questions. So any question, any idea, any god you brought to Socrates, he said, well, I have a question on that. He wanted to manifest a higher understanding. But then they said, if you don't believe in any god, you're scary to the individuals. How do I know you're not going to punch me tomorrow? There's a god behind not punching. This means there's an idea behind. Socrates basically said this, and this is fascinating. I don't believe in any ideas. Every idea I have a question on.
Sure.
They're like, well, if you don't believe any ideas, then you don't believe not to steal. He's like, no, I don't believe not to steal. I believe something deeper than that. I'm right now not going to steal, but I don't believe in not stealing means what you think it means. I think it's something deeper. I have a question on it. Sure. They're like, yeah, but if you don't believe in not stealing, then I'm scared that you're going to steal. So they killed him. Right. It's the same exact thing that Nietzsche said. Well, new customs are coming out. There's no law behind it. Let's kill them. Let's cancel it. It's too scary to watch this custom go.
I mean, look, Gandhi is the one who said that, the ideal society would be an ordered anarchy. Because people would do the right thing because it's the right and look, to some degree that's true. Like when you say to someone, I'm not a religious person, or I don't particularly do the right thing or the wrong thing because it's illegal or it's legal. If you say to me like, well, Jim, then what stops you from raping as many people as you want to? And I say, well, no, I do. I rape as many people as I want to, which is none. Because I wouldn't want to do that to a person. I wouldn't want a person to have that horrifying experience. There's nothing in me that desires to do that.
When you're saying you don't want, want is an idea.
Right.
I ideally don't want to do
something.
something.
But I don't feel a compulsion to do
Good,
because I feel empathy. Because I feel, so I don't need a law.
But your idea is your judge. Your idea that you don't want to rape is judging you. Now you want to know if there's a logical understanding to the idea or only an emotional understanding. We could debate that. But we're saying that every idea might have a logical component, and might have emotional, might have a masculine, might have a feminine component.
So is some of this, though, then a function of, like what Freud talked about in Civilization and its discontents? This idea that, look, it's like the room full of kids. Like you gotta give rules. And then you can explain the rules as they mature if you need to.
Because they're not going to understand them.
Like, fine, just whatever gets you to not hate your sister, you don't have to understand. Like, it'd be nice if you did. But if you can't get to the point where you understand, like if I don't rape people because I understand from an empathy standpoint that's a terrible thing to do to a human being, or if I don't rape people because it's illegal to rape people and I'm afraid I'll go to jail, fine, as long as you're not raping people. This is good. This is what we need. Like,
but
we want to live in a society.
Imagine you tell me, I have this idea not to rape people, right? I have this idea not to rape people, but I'm in the middle of questioning the idea.
That would be a very controversial thought.
That's how Socrates looked to the Athenians. That's
Local
how he looked to them.
Questioning.
No, and that's what Socrates did. That's what Socrates did. He's like, well, why not? He wanted to understand 100%. Why not.
Because he wanted to get to some
they're like, so you have no definitive understanding. You have no gods.
Of course, that's scary.
And they killed him. And you know what he did? And this is a part that we still don't understand. The philosophers are trying to figure this out. Why he didn't run away fully? Like, that's a deep. Like, why did he decide it's better to die with people knowing this? That you give up your life for your not understanding of ideas.
He might have just been testing, why shouldn't I drink hemlock? He might have just kept.
But I want to say that over again because I think that's so deep. Socrates decided to die and give up his life because he wanted people to understand that you never understand your ideas.